All right, so we're going to learn about literature circles today, which was one of the best things to happen to my classroom. I teach sixth grade English language arts, so we do novel studies, we do how to read, how to highlight while we read, we do grammar, we do all sorts of things, writing. So literature circles are a really great way to incorporate all of that into one, and they can be used for any grade, kindergarten, learning to read, all the way up to AP English classes. I think it would be great for AP English. I'm by no means an expert on literature circles. I simply really, really like them, and so I've done a lot of research to figure out how to tweak them to best work in my classroom. So today I'm going to be talking about what I've found that works for me and giving you some ideas for what other people have done too. So first off, what are literature circles? Lit circles are essentially book clubs in a classroom. Students are in charge of their own discussions. They are in charge of what they're getting from the book. Of course, you can still have teacher input in different ways, but it's not a teacher-guided discussion where the teacher gives a list of questions and the students have to go and find the answers. It's a lot of group work, which is so important to development at any age, and usually each lit circle is reading a different book. So if this is our classroom and there are 6 different groups, we might have 6 different books that show up as part of a lit circle. It's great because then you can bring in multiple perspectives for a different issue. So in this classroom, it might be a civil rights study where you have some school integration, you have all these different things, and you can have students work in their individual lit circles, but you can also bring it back into a big class discussion where one group might say, well, in our group, in the book that we're reading, the protagonist dealt with this and her feelings were such. And then another group can say, that's interesting because ours was similar to different, that kind of thing. So it's really, really great to have a common thread linking all the books together. Why use lit circles? Why have so many teachers around the world fallen in love with this and used it in their classroom? Some have used it but then said it's not for me. But why have so many people loved it? First off, there's a choice in text and possibly task to increase engagement. I know for me, I started thinking about how I can use lit circles when we study Anne Frank, because just keeping it real, Anne Frank is not the most exciting novel. I can only jump around and get excited for my kids for so long until I'm exhausted. I didn't like Anne Frank all that much when I had to read Anne Frank in middle school. But the bottom line is that it is so important to learn about the Holocaust. It's so important to learn about empathy and relating to people. So the bottom line is that yes, it's important to read, but are there other ways of achieving that goal of learning about the Holocaust, of learning about sympathy and empathy? So that's when I started looking at lit circles. I want my students to get pumped up about reading, and I don't want them to say that they stopped reading a book because they didn't care about it. So with lit circles, you can continue to read and you can care about what you're reading because you get to choice. You get to choose your book, choose what you're reading. Lit circles increase community because you have small groups working together. They have authentic conversations, which are great to overhear as a teacher. Increase student ownership of what they're learning. They're the ones that are driving what they're learning. And you have less teacher talk and more student talk, which research shows have more student gains. The more students talk, the more they interact with other classmates, the less it's teachers stage on stage, then the more they learn. So how to set up lit circles. How do we get this big machine going? First, pick a theme or some kind of central point. What is the purpose of this unit? It could be a genre study, it could be a historical time period, it could be just choice book, it could be anything you want it to be, but it's good to have some kind of a central theme running through all of them. Next, pick some books that you think will fit with your theme, may interest your kids, that are appropriate, and book talk these for the class. You might want to read a selection from the book to kind of give them a hook. You might pass them around, let them look at them. You might show them reviews from other classes for what they thought of the books. But it's good they need to have an idea of what each book is, and it's usually helpful for them to look at the book so they know what they're getting themselves into. They don't necessarily want to sign up for a 500-page book over a 200-page book. It's not exactly fair. Then let each student rank their choices 1, 2, 3, 4, however many books you have, or you can limit it to 4, and assign lit circles based on their choices. Each student should be put in a lit circle that's at least in their top 3 choices. This is where you can tweak things if students don't get along and they shouldn't be working together, and that boat has sailed. You can make sure that students are reading at the appropriate level. It's great for a differentiation because the students that need the challenge, they can have the more challenging book. So with my Anne Frank example, we still have Anne Frank in the curriculum, but it's a choice. So the kids that are on the higher track, the kids that have already read all the other books, that haven't really read Anne Frank yet, yeah, they might get to read Anne Frank, and they might be assigned Anne Frank because that's where they are developmentally. Next, you need to go over meeting dates, and depending on the age of your students, you might want to create a reading schedule. So what this looks like in my classroom, I say, here are the dates that you're going to be meeting for lit circles. For this one book, you have these 4 meetings, or 5 or 6, or however many you can fit into your class based on the length of class that you have, what else is going on. It's good to plan it out in advance. And then you can say, all right, so you have these meetings, this is your book, these are the number of pages in your book. Y'all need to divide it up based on what you read. So some groups of kids might be the kind where they finish a book in one night. Then you need to figure out what they're going to do. Or they need to figure out that they only read these chapters for this meeting and they don't finish the book in a night. It's up to you, depending on your kids. And you might want to consider the use of roles in lit circles, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I've found roles to be very, very helpful. If you want to learn more, Harvey Daniels is the lit circle king, and he has written a lot of books. This top book, Many Lessons for Literature Circles, has been my Bible, in essence, for literature circles, because it says, here are some problems you might encounter, here's a way to fix it, whether it's off-task behavior or slackers not doing their work. It tells you different ways to incorporate how you're going to teach normal things in the reading classroom into your lit circles. So it's not just kids talking off topic for half an hour about the new Transformers movie. You can help guide them in where they still get learning, because I think that's where a lot of teachers are really afraid when they meet lit circles, because they are giving up control. It's a lot of work on the front end and less control during the actual meetings. But if you structure it right, they can learn more than what they would have learned anyway. So lit circles in my classroom, we kind of progress throughout the year where it starts out very, very, very structured, and then it gets less structured as the year continues. So lit circles in quarter 3 are very different from lit circles in quarter 4. And that's just me changing what I do so that I can get them ready for the next grade. And I know what they're going to have to face in the 7th grade, so I can get them started there. I slowly ease up through baby steps for what their responsibilities are, and I definitely have role sheets. So first I give them one sheet that says, here's what we're doing, here's what you're expected to do each time we meet. Then they get their role sheets. I have 4 roles because the way my classes work, I have 4 students per group, sometimes 3. I think between 3 and 5 is the best. Definitely no fewer than 3 and no more than 5. So there's the role of discussion director, essentially the leader, who needs to bring questions to each group meeting about the reading that time. And it might be something like, what did you think of this? What did you think was going to happen? We spend some time in class talking about good questions and bad questions so that the discussion director knows that you're not going to get a good discussion out of a question where the answer can be found in the book. What time did the dad come in the apartment? That's not a good question. That's silly. So we talk about that, and we talk about what it means to have good questions. Then we have Word Wizard, which is basically a vocabulary finder. Find words, share them with the group. I have each group keep a track, one huge list of all the words that we have, and then you can do what you want with that. You can have a quiz, you can have them use them in their writing, you can do all sorts of different things. Passage picker is another role where you have to find a couple of passages and say why they stood out to you. So it might be, this part was surprising to me because I didn't expect it, or this part I was confused as to what was actually going on because the author's word choice. Different things. And then character sketcher, we look at characterization a lot in my class. So they choose one character and answer 8 different questions about that character. How do we know different things about the character? What do other people think about the character? That kind of thing. My best and grounding sheet that the kids have for Lit Circles is this sheet with the nice little border. Most all of these ideas come from the Mini Lessons for Lit Circle book by Harvey Daniels and Nancy Steinke, because it's the Bible, really. So at the top of the page, you have the week schedules. So the students have a chance to write in the date for each meeting. They go ahead and decide their roles, which you can do with coins, where you say, okay, you pick up this coin, that's your role for this one. You can pass them around, it's up to you. And then either I tell them what chapters are due when we begin the Lit Circles, so I go ahead and divide it because I know what tests they're going to have and that kind of stuff, or they decide that so they can spread it out. So if they know that homecoming is during week 2, maybe they'll only have one chapter due that week, and then they'll add on a little bit more for weeks 1 or week 3. They can decide, it gives them more ownership. So underneath that we have ground rules, and ground rules are really important because that's what forms the basis of this community for the Lit Circle. We talk about what makes good ground rules, what are things we can stick to. Most ground rules in my classroom look like stay on topic, respect others' opinions, don't argue, don't come in late, always bring your materials, that kind of stuff. And then the bottom of the page is our group liability policy. Each group has to figure out what's going to happen if someone doesn't bring his or her materials to class. So if we're depending on Johnny to be the discussion director, but Johnny decided he was going to stay up all night playing Call of Duty instead of writing down his discussion questions and reading, there has to be some kind of a consequence. Otherwise, there's not going to be any kind of follow through. So they have to figure out, first off, what happens on the first offense, and then they have to decide what happens in subsequent choices when they're not doing their work. So for the first offense, for my classes, they got kind of creative. Some classes wanted to have a post-it note saying, I don't respect reading class. Some classes or groups, the kids had to sit underneath the table while they were doing their work. Sometimes they were sent to the hall to finish their work, or they had to stand at the window and do it. I had to monitor what they wanted to do because some wanted the most outrageous things to happen. I had to, you go back and you say, is this going to achieve your goal? Because eventually your goal is that everyone does the work every week. So is having a student hop on one leg for 30 minutes going to help that one finish up his work so we can share it with you? And then they look at each other and they say no. So for most groups, the second offense and subsequent offenses was sitting out at recess for a determined amount of time. So that's kind of what Lit Circles look like in my classroom. I've really enjoyed giving students ownership of them, seeing where they go. I do have grades when they turn in their role work, so they are graded for completion, they're graded for accuracy, and that way I can check on what they're doing and how they're understanding the book. So I hope that you use Lit Circles and you love them, and if you don't, if you have questions, please ask me and I would love to answer them.